In March 2023, the quiet city of Vancouver, Washington, was shaken by the disappearance of Meshay Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. Both had been last seen in the company of Kirkland Warren, a man with a violent past and a pending murder charge in Arkansas. When their bodies were discovered days later in a rural area, the gruesome details of their deaths and the system's failure to protect them unfolded. This story is not just about the brutal murders, but also a stark reminder of the consequences of ignoring the warning signs of escalating violence. Kirkland Warren's life was marred by violence long before he became infamous for the brutal killings of Meshay Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart. His violent history began in Arkansas in 2017 when he shot and killed a man named Curtis Urquhart. Warren later claimed that the shooting was in self-defense, stating he feared for his life, but the circumstances surrounding Urquhart's death raised suspicions. In Arkansas, Warren was charged with first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse after he allegedly dumped Urquhart's body in a ditch. In a shocking twist, Warren was able to post bail and was released despite the severity of the charges. This marked the beginning of a tragic series of events that would ultimately lead to the deaths of 2 more innocent lives, as Warren's violent tendencies would continue unchecked. By the time Warren met Meshay Melendez, his violent behavior was already well documented. In 2022, his relationship with Melendez turned toxic, and it wasn't long before the warning signs emerged. In December of that year, he reportedly shot at her apartment, a brazen act that highlighted his growing disregard for human life. Melendez initially reported the incident to authorities, but later recanted her statement, likely out of fear, adding complexity to the already dangerous situation. Despite the fact that Warren was facing murder charges in Arkansas and had committed violent acts in Washington, he was allowed to remain free. He was even able to maintain contact with Melendez, despite a court-issued protection order barring him from seeing her. The system's failure to properly assess the risk posed by Warren would have deadly consequences. On March 12, 2023, Meshay Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart, were last seen with Warren. They left an acquaintance's house early in the morning, and witnesses reported that Melendez appeared passed out in the car. Warren left the scene with both Melendez and her daughter, and neither would be seen alive again. 6 days later, the bodies of Melendez and Layla were discovered in a rural area near Washougal. Both had been shot in the head, execution style, and the autopsy revealed further horrifying details. Layla had been sexually assaulted. The brutality of the crime shocked the community and ignited widespread outrage over how Warren had been allowed to remain free despite his violent history. Warren's defense would later claim that the murders were accidental, a result of a struggle during an argument. He alleged that the gun, which he had given to Melendez for protection, went off by accident. However, investigators quickly dismissed his story as inconsistent with the evidence found at the scene. The discovery of the bodies not only confirmed Warren's guilt, but also raised significant questions about how the legal system failed to protect Melendez and her daughter. Despite multiple reports of violence, including domestic abuse and shootings, the courts had allowed Warren to continue his reign of terror. The case would soon capture national attention, as the details of Warren's dark past and the system's failure became widely known. As the investigation progressed, the pieces of Warren's troubled past came to light. His history of violence began with a murder in Arkansas, where he had killed Curtis Urquhart in 2017, but was inexplicably released on bail. After relocating to Washington, his relationship with Melendez turned dangerous. Despite numerous reports of domestic abuse, including a shooting incident in late 2022, Warren continued to have contact with her. The day after Melendez and Layla were last seen alive, Warren was found with evidence linking him to their death shell casings, blood, and the victims' belongings. The trial of Kirkland Warren was an emotional and grueling affair, both for the prosecution and the family of the victims. The case was clear. Warren had murdered Meshay Melendez and her daughter Layla in cold blood. The prosecution presented evidence of the violent nature of the murders, including ballistics evidence and the gruesome autopsy reports. The case also included testimony from family members, highlighting the fear Melendez had lived with in the months leading up to her death. Warren, in his defense, continued to deny responsibility for the murders. His claim that the gun had gone off by accident was met with skepticism by both the court and the public. The prosecution dismantled his narrative, demonstrating that Warren had a history of violence, manipulation, and deceit. They presented the details of his prior murder in Arkansas, showing a pattern of escalating violence. One of the most harrowing moments of the trial came when Melendez's family members took the stand to share the impact the murders had on their lives. Melendez's sister, Nicole Harris, tearfully recounted how Meshay and Layla were her whole world, and how their loss had left a void that could never be filled. Her statement was a powerful reminder of the human cost of Warren's actions. The trial also put the spotlight on the failures of the criminal justice system. Prosecutors argued that Warren should never have been released on bail, given his violent history and the danger he posed to Melendez. Questions were raised about why a man with a pending murder charge was allowed to continue to terrorize his ex-girlfriend and her daughter. Many in the community expressed outrage at how the legal system had let Melendez and Layla down. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left with the undeniable truth of Warren's guilt. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution had successfully painted a picture of a man who had no regard for human life. The jury found Warren guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and child molestation. On October 9, 2024, Kirkland Warren was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge in the case, noting the horrific nature of the crimes, stated that Warren's actions were inhumane and that he showed no remorse for the pain he caused. The sentence brought some measure of closure to Melendez's family, though the scars of the tragedy will remain with them forever. The case of Kirkland Warren is a stark reminder of the consequences of failing to address violent behavior early on. It is a tragedy that could have been prevented if the warning signs had been heeded and the legal system had taken stronger action. For Melendez's family and the community, the hope is that this case will lead to changes in how domestic violence and violent offenders are handled in the future. Warren's sentence marked the end of a dark chapter, but it also left behind lingering questions about accountability and justice. How many lives could be saved if the system acted with greater urgency when dealing with individuals like Warren? The answers remain elusive, but the legacy of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart serves as a powerful call for change.
Ready for a deep dive? This one's tough, dealing with the tragic story of Meshay Melendez and her little girl, Layla Stewart. And it's going to be a rough one, honestly. It's not just about the crime itself, but, about how the system failed them at every turn.
It's a deeply disturbing case, yeah. And unfortunately, not as uncommon as we'd like to think.
Exactly. And for you, with your work in criminal justice reform, I think this one might really hit home. So let's start with Kirkland Warren, the man responsible. This guy had a history. And I'm not talking about parking tickets. We're talking a first-degree murder charge back in 2017, Arkansas.
The victim in that case was Curtis Urquhart. Found dumped in a ditch, Warren claimed self-defense.
Oh, right, because dumping a body just screams self-defense.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. Despite a murder charge, he was out on bail, released.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, the bail system, judges have to weigh a lot of factors.
Yeah.
Flight risk, the defendant's situation, the nature of the crime.
And sometimes those assessments miss the mark.
Tragically, this case seems to be one of those times.
And it gets worse. Fast forward to Warren's relationship with Meshay Melendez, and the red flags just keep popping up. We're not just talking arguments here. This is documented domestic violence. And then, in 2022, things escalate big time. Warren actually shoots at Melendez's apartment.
This wasn't a heated argument. He fired a gun at her home.
It makes your blood run cold. Imagine the terror Meshay must have felt. And here's the heartbreaking part. She initially went to the police about the shooting, but later recanted her statement.
Sadly, a pattern we see often in these cases. It speaks to the pressure and fear victims are under. Recanting doesn't mean the abuse didn't happen. It's often about the control the abuser still holds.
Trapped with nowhere to turn. It's infuriating, right? We've got a guy with a prior murder charge, a history of violence, even firing a gun in his girlfriend's apartment. You'd think alarm bells would be going off.
Yeah.
What's it going to take for the system to recognize someone's dangerous? So many red flags, and it feels like nobody's noticing. And then, in March of 2023, it all goes wrong, just like we've been worried about. March 12th, Meshay and Layla, 7 years old, just vanish. Last anyone saw of them, they were with Warren.
Leaving a friend's place early that morning, one witness even mentioned that Meshay seemed, I don't know, out of it in the car. Like she might have been passed out even. Hard to say for sure, but...
Oh, God.
Yeah, it raises the question of drugs, coercion, adds a whole other level of horror to this.
It's just awful. The thought of her not even fully aware, her little girl right there, and then neither of them ever seen alive again.
6 days. 6 days later, their bodies are found. Rural area near Washougal. Both shot, execution style. And the autopsy on Layla. It showed she had been sexually assaulted.
God, knowing what we know about Warren, about him being free to do this, it just makes it so much worse.
It's easy to get caught up in the horror, and it is horrific. But for you, especially with your interest in these cases, in reform, this is where we have to look for the patterns, right? The moment they disappeared, with his history, the police would have known. This wasn't a random missing persons case. And the discovery, well, that would just intensify everything.
All hands on deck. No question about it. It's hard to imagine what he thought he could get away with. Which takes us to the trial. And the prosecution, they didn't mess around. They had ballistics, the autopsy, testimony from Meshay's family. It all built this picture of a man on the edge, a powder keg ready to blow.
And they had the evidence to back it up. Meshay's sister, Nicole Harris, her testimony was just heartbreaking. You could feel the loss in every word.
Those moments in court, they really get to you. It becomes real, not just a case file anymore. But even with all that, Warren still claimed he was innocent.
He did.
Right.
Said the shooting was accidental, an argument, things got out of hand. Even claimed he'd given Meshay the gun for protection.
Oh, come on.
Right. Knowing their history, it's a tough sell.
Shifting the blame, classic abuser tactic. But the jury saw right through it. They'd heard it all, and on October 9th, 2024, they came back with the verdict. Guilty on all charges. First-degree murder, second-degree murder, child molestation.
Life in prison without parole.
Life without parole. It's hard to imagine any punishment really fitting a crime like this, but at least he can't hurt anyone else. Still, it leaves you with so many what-ifs. Could this have been prevented? Should it have been? It's heavy stuff, no doubt about it. And it makes you wonder, where do we even begin? We see the signs, the murder charge, the violence, and the system just, I don't know, it's like it's built to fail. How do we balance the rights of someone like Warren with the need to protect everyone else?
It's the question, isn't it?
It really is.
And with your background, your interest in these issues, it's something we have to grapple with, balancing individual rights with keeping people safe. It's a conversation we need to be having more and more.
Absolutely. I mean, what's the point of a protection order if it doesn't actually protect anyone?
Right.
What does that say to victims?
Right. It's not about blaming anyone, but about recognizing that the system has these, gaps. And those gaps have consequences, real consequences.
And in this case, God, it's just, you wonder, what could have been different? What do we change so this doesn't keep happening?
It has to start somewhere. How we assess risk, like with Warren, especially with bail. It's not about locking everyone up, but recognizing when someone is dangerous.
Yeah, seeing the signs, the patterns, and just as important, supporting the victims, giving them a way out, resources, safety. We have to do better at intervening early because it all goes downhill so fast.
Early intervention is key, absolutely.
It's tough, no easy answers. But these conversations are so important. We can't let Meshay and Layla be just another statistic. We have to advocate for a system that actually protects people.
It's on all of us. For the victims, for everyone.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening, if you want to learn more about all of this, about domestic violence prevention, support, anything, we've got links in the show notes. Knowledge is power, right? We can make a difference.
One step at a time.
This case, it sticks with you. And as you continue your work, I want you to think about this. What if just one thing had been different with Kirkland Warren? What if someone stepped in? What if the system worked the way it should have? Meshay and Layla deserved better. They deserved a chance. And that's what we have to fight for. A world where these tragedies are preventable, not inevitable.
In October 2024, Kirkland Warren was sentenced to life in prison for the murders of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart. The case highlighted serious flaws in the justice system, where a man with a known history of violence was allowed to continue terrorizing his victims. For the family of Melendez and Layla, the sentence brings some closure, but the pain of losing to innocent lives lingers. Warren's case serves as a call for stronger measures to protect those at risk from domestic violence and ensure justice is served before tragedy strikes.